as well as, other areas. We talk about communication of ACM, national academies, and some other things that might be interest. And we also talk about the open problems in the field, major open problems in the field. At any time, if you, we would be happy if you send any questions that you may have. You may do it through LinkedIn or YouTube. These are the best. You can do it probably Twitter and Facebook as well, but LinkedIn and YouTube would be the best. So now, without further ado, let's go to Moshe. Do you want to say some starting things, and then we can go after that?
Well, good morning, good day, good evening, wherever you are. And thank you, Mohammed, for inviting me for this conversation, and I look forward to it.
Yeah, great to have you here. So we will learn some nice aspects about the logic that and actually application to other areas. But before that, so let's start from, I think, the beginning. You were a child. Did you want to be a scientist? You want to say a little bit about your family? What do they do, your children, if you want? And what was the motivation? Did you have any other person in your family who was a professor or scientist in general? Yeah, go ahead.
So I grew up on a small kibbutz in Israel. Kibbutz is less now than it used to be, but the idea is it's a kind of it's a collective model. It was really the socialist idea, but in the small rather than at large. So a group of people agreeing to live by the socialist ideal of to each according to his needs, from each according to his ability. It was a very beautiful, idyllic place in the mountains, in the hills near Haifa. It was a great place to grow up. At the time, there was no one when I was a child, no one around me was even went to college. They were just not something that people do. In fact, most of the people that came who grew up, only later I realized that the majority of these people were Holocaust survivors. And they were fairly young. None of them has gone to college. In fact, we left the kibbutz in 1967 because my father decided he didn't want to go to college. He was a teacher and he was teaching 200% load. And he said, I'd like to go back to 100% load, and I'd like to go on my own time. I'd like to go to college. And he arranged even for a scholarship, so it won't cost them anything. And the kibbutz says, well, that's a very individual. You said, I want to go to college. That's very individualistic. That shouldn't be your decision. The membership will decide if you go to college. And my father was a hard man. He realized at this point he lost his autonomy, and he said, okay, we are leaving. And he decided the whole family had to follow. But
yeah, I heard actually about this. A kibbutz thing from Guy Kortzars, actually. He told me, I think he was also involved there. But yeah. So how was your experience there, essentially? Did you like in general?
Oh, it was a wonderful place to grow up. It was very idyllic. You look at pictures today, it's a beautiful place up in the hills, very small community. At the time, there were probably like 50 families. So you knew everyone knew you. It was perfectly safe. Nobody locked doors. I would just go tell my mother I'm going to play with my friends, and she didn't say where exactly are you going, when exactly. Just be back for dinner.
Yeah.
It was a really wonderful place to grow up. I have lots of nostalgia for that place. In fact, my wife used to say, you can take the boy out of the farm, but you cannot take the farm out of the boy. So,
I see.
So in some sense, I'm still a kibbutz boy.
Yeah.
But somewhere around maybe age 10 or 11, I'm not sure exactly when, my parents saw that I have kind of interest in science, and they brought to me a collection, like 10 volume of a series that was called The Young Technologist. So this used to be actually a magazine that started being published, I think, in Israel in the 50s. And then the magazine did not, after 10 years, did not last, but they decided to bound all the volume, to bound all the pamphlets, all the issues, and make it into a sequence of books, which I read, 10 volumes, and I read them cover to cover multiple times. And I think that was the point in which it was clear to me, I want to be a scientist. At that point, what is a scientist? You're a child, you have some, I don't know that I knew exactly what does it mean to be a scientist. Nobody told me then about publish or perish. Nobody told me about grant proposal. Nobody told me about tenure committees. None of that was known at the time. It was kind of but I like science. And even exactly what science it was, I didn't know at the time what science I was going to go. I just wanted to be a scientist. So this is where my dream of being a scientist. And then when I left kibbutz, when I was 13 years old, when my father decided he was going to college, it became very clear that when I finish high school, I'll go to college too. So there was just no question about it.
Great. So that was the story. So your father was a teacher. So in some sense, actually, you had the idea of being professor from your father. Like both my parents were teachers, so I think they had some effect on me.
So my father is a kind of an interesting case because he grew up in Romania, and they had mandatory, I think, 3 years mandatory education, 3 years, grade first, second, third grade. But he never went to school.
I see.
And so I asked him, how did it happen? And he says, well, all you had to do is bribe. Romania was a very corrupt country. All you had to do is bribe someone, and so you don't have to go to school. But instead, he came up from a rabbinical family. And I don't know how many generations of rabbis are there in a family. I'm the black sheep. But he was destined to the rabbinate. So they sent him to get religious education from age 6 or 7, or even before. I think they start even earlier. And I said, where did you learn, for example, arithmetics? Oh, he said they hired someone to come and tutor me in arithmetics. So he survived the Holocaust. Then he goes to Israel and they want to start a kibbutz. And they say, what are we going to do with this young man? We need to build a kibbutz. We need someone who can do things. Well, my father had very good hands. So he was very mechanically talented. So they said, we'll send him. So they sent him to take a course and he became a mechanic.
I see.
So, there are tractors, the kibbutz had agriculture, there are trucks to be repaired. And so he worked in the machine, in the garage, we called it, but it was a kind of a machine shop. And as a child, I loved it because it was interesting place to visit and interesting instruments. It was, I really loved my father being a mechanic. But he had the kind of intellectual aspirations. So after a few years as a mechanic, he told the kibbutz, I'd like to get more education. So again, what nobody thought about college, it had to be very pragmatic. So they said, how about if we send you to a teacher seminary? So he applied to teacher seminary, application. How many years of education do you have? 0. So they said, okay, but this was after the Holocaust. They were more flexible then. They said, we'll invite you for an interview. So in one interview, and they saw he was well read. So they said, okay, you have no formal education whatsoever, but we'll admit you to a teacher seminary.
I see.
So without finishing, not finishing high school, he didn't finish elementary school. He became a teacher. That's how he started.
Yeah, actually, to add this thing. So this is like one of the things that I mentioned actually to my students. So especially, we are like both working on some of the theoretical stuff. This kind of more mechanical things or building actually is quite interesting. Like I even give some examples to my introduction, like when I teach introduction to algorithms. So that this thing that I'm talking to you, like for example about minimum spanning tree. Actually, I have used this algorithm to minimize the amount of wire, because I have wire. I'm doing also this type of things. I like it actually. I have done some wiring and I use the minimum spanning tree algorithm to minimize the number of boxes that I will buy from Home Depot. because that's like if you minimize the thing, then you can actually save things. So this is interesting because sometimes you will. So of course we can write the computer programs, but sometimes like when you do some of this stuff in your world, I have done, I mean, like plumbing and other, and use all these algorithmic ideas to optimize something. So that's actually quite interesting. So, and I mean, I see that like this type of mechanical thinking actually is a good thing.
But
now,
I did not inherit a mechanical aptitude from my father.
Yeah.
In fact, my parents realized at about age 6 that I would end up being a theoretician. Because they thought that I was too cerebral. I was read books, but I was very cerebral boy.
Yeah.
So they consulted with a child psychologist, and the child psychologist says, buy him games that are more mechanical.
I see.
So they bought me a game for my birthday. They bought me a game. I think for my 6th birthday, they bought me a game called Meccano, which I think is the analog what we call here a Rector set. And then they show me, I went and I opened the game and I spent a couple of hours, and then I come out and they say, okay, so what did you build? And I said, I didn't build anything. I just read a manual. So basically I would look, they had all kind of diagrams how to build something. And I would look at the diagram until I understood it fully. And at that point I said, what's the point of building it? I already understand it. So I actually very rarely built anything.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I should confess that I like when I was, I mean, like child, I didn't do that much of mechanical things. The first thing is that the time that I bought a house in US, that was the time that I started working with this one. And then you will see, okay, now at that time, actually, you have ideas, and these houses are the one that you can actually do something with it, and you can do some meaningful things. Then you will learn essentially. See, it's not hard actually. If you have the nice ideas, you can do that.
Especially if you know that if you invite a plumber to do anything, doesn't matter. If the plumber comes in, it will cost you $250.
Exactly.
So you're motivated to try to say, let me first try to do it by myself.
And worse than that, you need to actually, lots of the time, you need to also stand with him to make sure that everything is going well. Not all the people, they may cut the corner or something like this. So in some sense, you are spending time and you need to pay money. So it might be better to learn such that you can do it. And I think like this is one of the things that I encourage the people. I mean, if they like this type of thing, they can at least try it. See if they like. I think they may enjoy out of that. Great. Now, what about your family, your wife? Is she also in like science, and your children? Yeah.
So we have my wife and I have one. He's her son. He's my stepson, but I've raised him since he was about 8 years old, and he's actually a successful computer scientist.
Great. Where is he, or what does?
He does something completely different than me. He does computer graphics.
Oh, I see.
I mean, he's in California. In fact, he was just visiting us, and he just left about half an hour ago. And he's a very successful computer scientist working for Adobe, does research at Adobe.
Yeah. Did you have any influence on him?
I would like to think so. I think that in fact, I know that when he was maybe a freshman or sophomore in college, I had a conference in Crete.
Yeah.
And it's a nice place to visit. So I told my wife and my son, why don't you come with me? I'll be there for 3 days at the conference, but you can do some sightseeing. And after that, we'll do some sightseeing together. So we had a great time in Crete. And told me later, he said, being a scientist is not so bad. You go to nice places. So,
and probably this is one of the nice, because I think it's still like the Rhodes and what was the other thing, Santorini, that I have been in Greece. And still these are the things that I still, when like during the COVID time, I was just thinking about those places. While I couldn't travel, so at least I have visited there. These are probably the most beautiful places that you can bring someone there.
Yeah. So you go to some nice places, and there was a conference that I have been to several times, there was one person who was organizing, and his slogan was to conference where no one has conference before. And so he kind of chose exotic places to do conferences. And so I end up going to conferences, Kazakhstan, in Senegal, really interesting places.
Like the not typical places, essentially, for bigger conferences.
So you wouldn't go there otherwise. Who's going to go to Kazakhstan as a tourist? It's not common, but it was a very nice visit.
There are similar things about the ACM. I think it was before ACM, now it's ICPC programming contest. They are doing similar things. I was glad actually to visit several places to do that.
Some nice places,
Yeah, these are nice places. Great. So I think we are somehow like go back and forth to your personal life and more academic life, I think, to make it all people like interested and follow up. So let's, we will come back to this. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about, communication of ACM. So like, I think you have been the editor or like actually chief.
Editor-in-chief. I was editor-in-chief.
Editor-in-chief, actually, you were there. I wasn't sure whether you were
editor-in-chief for about a decade.
So I think it has changed a lot. I hear like all the time about CACM. There are some special issues. Some like selected papers. Tell us a little bit about the experience of that, and then we will go back again to your.
So, some people have grand plans for life. Okay. I never had a grand plan for life. Okay. To me, it was just like there's too much unknown and uncertainty to really have really big long-term plans. So I was always about what's the next thing you're going to do. You still have to have your values and your principle, but I would never had great plans. But it kind of started, I was department chair at Rice. And then I learned about I was invited as department to go to the what we call the snowbird meeting. So this is biannual meeting of the Convenience Association for department chairs.
That's an important one, actually. I think I heard actually it's a very important one. And if you become the chair, you should go there such that you will.
Because you go there. It was very, very important because you go there and you suddenly, you spend, about 3 days to 2 or 3 days to talking about looking at the big picture of computing research, which is something that usually you don't do. You're in your own research area, and you're dealing with your colleagues, but suddenly you're looking at the big pictures. And I really enjoyed it tremendously, kind of developing an interest in looking at the big picture. And then there was a call for nominations for the board of CRA. And I said, that's plenty of an opportunity to learn more about the kind of the big picture of computing. So I submitted my nomination and I was elected. So now I'm on the board, and I tend to be somewhat opinionated, and I'm not the quiet person. When I have opinions, I don't shy from sharing them. And then the issue came up probably around 2004. This was the aftermath of the dot-com crash. It became known as dot bomb. And one of the things that happened is that in the late 90s with the internet, suddenly CS enrollment kind of went way, way, way up, somewhat similar to what's happened now. Suddenly it was incredibly popular and everybody was trying to hire and you couldn't find people to hire. It was incredibly popular. But then it was the dot-com crash, and people forget that this was followed by the telecom crash. The telecom company made huge investment in infrastructure, and then which ultimately proved to be useful, but in the short term, they had overcapacity.
Yes.
So, this is, for example, how, today Bell Lab is part of Nokia, but this was part of AT&T. This was still the big days of, it was all AT&T Bell Labs.
By the way, I think the same thing actually happening probably maybe from the last year after COVID, exactly the same thing. They have put a lot of essentially compute engines at work, and then now the people maybe are not I mean, not all people
Yeah,
are
I just read.
The same thing in some sense happens.
It's happening now. I just read the Zoom is laying off people. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then all this got a lot of publicity, and then enrollment started going way, way down. So by the middle of the 2000s, enrollment were way down. I remember at Rice, students declare major as at the end of the sophomore year. So they don't have to declare a major until they can shop around, and then by the fourth quarter of their studies, they have to declare by the fourth semester, they have to declare the major. And we reached a point where we had, I think, something like 18 faculty members, and only 16 students declared majors in computer science. So that was really computer science world. And there was another thing that came up about the same time was the internet didn't enable offshoring to take, suddenly you can offshore software development because your communication became much, much cheaper, and there was a big drive, and India was much cheaper, and there are lots of smart people there. So India rose as a powerhouse, which is today in software services. So the combination of, on one hand, the telecom crash, the dot-com crash, the telecom crash, and the offshoring led to what became known then as the image crisis. Suddenly we thought people, computer science is not a promising field. Computing is not a promising field. So there was some board meeting, and I said, well, we need to get to the bottom of it. Is this hype? What's the reality there? And I was very vocal about it. So ACM decided to launch a task force we call it the Job Migration Task Force. And the question was, is there a future for computing jobs in the developed world? Or will everything will go to developing countries? The same way that much of manufacturing, at least low margin manufacturing, moved to, nobody does, if you look at your shirt, it was not made in the United States, okay? So much of low margin manufacturing moved away to Mexico or China, or even China is too expensive, Vietnam, maybe even Africa. So I was asked to lead it. And I think I brought to the job both, on one hand, I'm just intellectually curious. So I'm interested in things, even if it's just not narrowly in my research. And at the same time, at that point, I have been a manager at IBM. I've been department chair. I was an officer in Israeli Defense Forces, so I have kind of management experience, so to speak, in different settings. So task force, it's not just about the intellectual part, also running the task force efficiently. And there was a big success that we came up with a report that says in one line, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. That the jobs, yes, there will be jobs going to India, but there will be lots of jobs that will stay in the United States. And the report received a fair amount of publicity. I mean, we got a New York Times editorial on the topic. So this was a...
Yeah, actually, I wanted to add also, something here. So this issue about the offshoring essentially jobs, still it is, like an important thing, even nowadays, this ChatGPT and other things, I forgot the name, that you can also, at GitHub, I forgot the name, but you can actually, now they can even try to help you to write the programs. But the catch is that I think this is the way that it comes back again, they come to US. And generally now we are coming to some problem, some optimization problem, some very fine tuning that for this actually you need to have quite a bit of a study. You cannot just, maybe if you just want to create some website, yes, you can just do it, please. But if you want to do something that like in less than, 20 milliseconds, you need to put the ad there and it should be very efficient, maximize revenue. These are exactly the one that you need a lot of study and essentially a lot of science for that.
But even beyond it, I mean, people feel confused. So ChatGPT, for example, does fairly well on maybe interview question or kind of a undergraduate assignment. But industrial software development is not about that. I mean, it's about, think about it, building a platform now. Now Microsoft has to build a platform for Bing Chat. Okay, are they going to ask Bing Chat to build a platform? Answer is of course not. Okay, one day maybe, but building a platform it's a bigger thing. These are huge pieces of software. It's about you need to think about the software life cycle and how to structure it in a way that it's going to be manageable and modularity and a whole bunch of things. So, I mean, the question to Microsoft right now is, yes, ChatGPT can answer coding questions, okay? Tell me how to balance a what is it, a black-red tree or something like that. That's okay. But will Bing Chat write the code for the platform for Bing Chat? And the answer is,
optimizations because each of them also need lots of trade-off and optimization. This is out of question essentially at this point.
People are confusing doing small coding problems that now apparently these chatbots can do very well because all of this has been published. So essentially they can spit it out.
Yeah.
But to think that software development is obsolete, and in some sense the same thing is what we realize in the offshoring. Software offshoring is that somebody has to write the requirement and overall design of the system. And at the beginning of the time, I mean, you see that the tech companies have still lots of people that write software. All of them have presence in India, for example.
Yes.
Because it is cheaper there and there are lots of smart people. But I mean, for the last 20 years, there's more demand for computing jobs than there are people. This has been the reality so this has been, that's why we said there's nothing to fear but fear itself.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my first experience with getting out of the box of my research world. Okay. So even in my research world, I kind of tend to be an activist. So I've started in the mid-90s to do programmatic organization. Okay. So there was DIMAC, which is a theory center at Rutgers, and I was approached by some colleagues and said, shall we try to do some special program? So we wrote a proposal for a special program on logic and algorithms. And that was a successful program. And part of it was, there was several conferences in the space of logic and computation. And the idea came up to why don't we try to run all of them together? So in 1996, we started something called the Federated Logic Conference, which meets every 4 years and brings many conferences together. And this has been very, very successful. By now I think the last meeting we had in August had like 12 conferences coming together.
Yeah, I think this year is like that as well, if I remember correctly.
No, it's every 4 years. So it was in 2022. The next one will be in 2026.
Okay, so that might actually be the previous year.
Yeah, it was in 2022.
Yeah.
So, and then inside ACM, there have been conversation about what they consider the sorry state of CSCM. The CSTM used to be considered the top application in computing. And it somehow, and it's a sequence of steps, how it declined. It's an interesting story how it declined. And it went to something that many people say that they get it in the mail and they toss it directly to the recycling box.
So that is like this is some of this.
And how one way it happened was that running a magazine which issues monthly is actually very, very difficult because you have a process with very uncertain input, submission, reviews, if you've been experienced with them, if you've done any editorial job, very uncertain. Somebody promise you a review, a month happened, 3 months happened. Oh, I'm sorry, I would delay by this, I would delay by that. You start and you look for a new reviewers. You hope that they will be guilty enough to do it. So it's very, very uncertain. At the same time, you have to crank up an issue every month. And the issue cannot be too large or too small. You have a very narrow range.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, yeah, I know exactly. I'm actually editor-in-chief of algorithmic. I have designed this fast-track algorithm for top conferences,
Yeah.
and this is exactly the thing. So we said that okay, we try to do it 90 days, but some of them, I mean, the reviewers or the editors, they don't, I mean, even send it for that. So I need to come and handle that. You need to actually. It is a hard job. It's not an easy job, I will say.
It's
And
not an easy
completely
job.
understand the things. Yeah.
So what happened was that, and it's a difficult job. And what happened at ACM is that people that joined the editorial board would just burn out. And so ACM, at that point, you know what? We said we're going to use only professional staff to do it. We'll use reviewers, but everything else, the editing, the editorial part will be all done from HQ. The problem is that, and if you look, for example, at this is the model that works, for example, well for Science magazine. You go to Science and you see they have a whole army of editors that are employed by the journal. But this is because you have lots of scientists have a PhD and they can find, for example, academic position. Okay, you're a physicist. Okay, you not necessarily are going to find an academic position. And the industrial position, it's not so clear. You have a PhD in physics. What industrial positions are you going to take?
I think nowadays they are taking some computer science course and then still go to tech companies. But
yeah, but if you have a PhD in computer science and you can't find an academic position, you go to industry and you'll get a good job. Exactly. I mean, Jeff Dean is one of the amazing stories, right? He's one of the luminaries of computing. And you ask him, how did you end up in Google? He said, I couldn't get an academic job.
Yeah, and he actually has done great work at Google.
And, yeah. So you couldn't hire computer scientists to do these editorial jobs. So who do you hire? You hire people with degrees in English. So they will do very good job on the writing, smoothing the writing, but they don't really understand the content. Yeah. So they try to do the editing by syntax, I call it. And you still need some domain expertise to do editing. So even though I'm just take areas that I have no expertise, I still have the capacity, partly, I'm in department, I had to do promotion cases for people outside of my field. I read the review and I understand what the review says and I can agree or disagree with the review. So they decided to do all the editing inside ACM. And then somehow the process happened that people, one area in computing is information systems that look at more how systems are deployed in the business sector. And they start publishing paper in IS, information systems. And that somehow became a process. And this is not necessarily, it's an important area of computing, but it's somehow less technical than it's not about algorithms, it's not about systems. So somebody published a paper there. So their friends say, oh, we can publish IS papers in CSCM and start submitting their papers. And other people says, oh, CSM is now publishing all these information system 4 letters. So I don't want to publish there. So over a few years, CSM became an IS publication. And in fact, it became a top-rated. It was one of the very top-rated IS publication for people in the IS world.
So by IS, you mean information
systems.
Information systems. Yeah.
For people in the IS world, this would be one of the very top journals for them to publish. So they would try to publish there. And most other people says, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in systems, in algorithms, in networking, not in just deploying system in a commercial setting. Yeah. So most people, again, they look at the magazine and say nothing interesting happening here, they throw it away. And CCM was still the flagship publication of ACM, and ACM realized how they do member surveys regularly, and they realized there was great dissatisfaction with CSCM. And so they had a committee that came up with a proposal how to revitalize CSCM.
I see.
And
I think that was, go ahead. Yeah.
And I just finished the offshoring report, which was, I said, was very successful and got lots of publicity for CSEM. And as I said, no good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah.
So people in ACM decided that I would be the good person to be editor-in-chief for CSEM. So they used the strategy of intervention. So I was at Snowbird, and they says, well, the president of ACM and the CEO of ACM and current president and previous presidents would like to have breakfast with you. I say, okay, I have no idea what it is about.
Yeah.
And we have breakfast, and they say CSM is in bad shape, and we believe you are the ideal person to try to take on it. Yeah. And I was foolish enough to say yes. So once I start something, I take it, I throw myself into the job. I said it's going to be a big job. I knew it's going to be a big job. And I told them that I need some teaching relief. I can't do it just on top of everything else at Rice. I didn't want to give up on my research. So it had to be, I wanted to get relief on some undergraduate teaching. And I didn't want to ask for it myself. I was smart enough at that point politically that I shouldn't ask it. I said, you should contact my dean and ask for this. So they contacted the dean of engineering and they told him why this is so important. And so I got teaching relief, which enabled me to put more time into it. And that became the story of my next 10 years. I spent about 10 years. I started in 2007. We relaunched in 2008. But I started working on it in 2007. I finished the offshoring, it was in 2006. A year later, I took on the editorship of CSEM. And then one of the things that also happened with CSEM was that said, well, you're the editor-in-chief. You're supposed to write, like columns.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I have to write columns. What do I write about? So I started writing columns. If you go back and you look at, there is ACM has a collection. It's called Vardi's Insights.
Yeah.
Of all my columns. So at the beginning, it's all about CSEM, about the CSEM revitalization project. Okay. Then I said, okay, I can just keep writing about CSEM. How much can you write about CSEM?
Yeah, exactly. That you need to find the next topic. Yeah.
So the next topic was computing research, the computing research community. Okay. And then, I started writing, for example, about pieces that have lots of reverberation, even though nothing was done about it. Conference versus journals. These were pieces that touched raw nerve among the community, and still we have not fully resolved it. And then the next thing was, okay, it was computing in society. So sometimes about around 2011, I think. So I started in writing columns. It was in 2008, probably. And then in 2011, I started writing about computing in society. And I went back recently to look at my columns. It was just very interesting. In 2011, I wrote about artificial intelligence, past, present, and future. And I predicted that AI will have a bright future. And it was just before. I mean, I knew nothing about deep learning because I wasn't part of the community. And deep learning kind of started exploding around about a decade ago, in 2012. In fact, suddenly there was some major progress on ImageNet and things like that.
I think also about the language understanding, this NLP stuff also.
Yeah, but it was interesting that I just made this prediction in 2011. I didn't know about what was going to happen, but in some sense was really, I was right on the mark. I said, no, don't give up on AI. Something will happen there. And now you go to the supermarket and you can talk to the clerk about ChatGPT.
Yeah, but that's actually, I think a few things. But I think you mentioned about this. I think that's actually good. Have the vision, and I think always I will see this Terminator movie. That's also another thing that actually now I watched it. I don't know 20 years ago. And now still you will see the same things that they mentioned in Terminator. In some sense, now we need to deal with it. Actually, these bots can be essentially put us in the second order citizens or not.
Yeah, so it's interesting is that I saw that when I came to Rice in December 1993. This year I'll be here for 30 years. I know that you want to talk about that. We can come back to that.
Yeah, but, sure. Good, yeah.
But in 1997, IBM was going to have the Deep Blue versus Kasparov.
Yeah.
And I had good I was at IBM before that. I had many friends at IBM, and I got invited. IBM paid for me to go and stay in New York and attend the tournament. So I went there and I attended the first game, and it was very interesting. And then, but we're still fairly new in Houston. We didn't have many friends, and I left my wife here. So I said, okay, the first game Kasparov won.
Yeah.
And I told myself, well, I'm convinced that one day computers will win, but I guess the time has not come yet because Kasparov won decisively the first game. And so I decided to cut my visit short and go back to Houston. And I didn't stay for the second game. And the second game, Deep Blue won.
Yeah.
And Kasparov was really demoralized. I think he played one more game. He lost the third game, and then he just conceded. After the third game, he conceded. And it's one of my life regrets that I did not stay for the second game.
Yeah.
Because I did not see it coming.
Yeah.
But at the time, I would say still, I did not see, it was still science fiction. I mean, yes, okay, even if you play chess, okay, what's the impact of that? And I think the thing that kind of suddenly made me realize the deep societal impact that can happen was a book that came up, I think it was in 2011 or 12, by Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee, The Race Against the Machine. And they talk about the impact on the job market. And 2012 was the Turing centenary. Okay, and there were events all around the world. ACM also organized an event in 2012. And Manchester University also organized an event because Turing worked for a few years in Manchester. And I was invited to go there and participate in a panel, the big questions of computing. What are the big questions of computing? So I think, okay, what are the big questions of computing? And I said, okay, I can talk about P versus NP, but everybody knows it, so that's not new. So I decided to, I gave a talk. I need to find that I probably have the slide summary. If computers can do all jobs that if machines can do all jobs that humans can do, what will people do? And there was a panel. So probably this was maybe like a 10 or 15 minute presentation. And after there was a panel discussion, and after the panel, there was a long line of people that wanted to talk to me. I mean, I never had such an experience. This was clearly, people discussed. I mean, somebody there talked about, distributed challenge, distributed systems. Somebody else, even Roger Penrose was there, and he talked about like the emperor in new clothes. And I was the most popular, and it was a revelation to me. I said, Roger Penrose is here. Why are you guys coming to talk to me?
Yeah.
And the answer was because this suddenly realized it touches people's life, okay? Whether the brain uses quantum gravity or not, okay, it's an interesting scientific question. Will I have a job or not? Oh, that's much more relevant to people.
Yeah.
And kind of this was to me an inflection point to start thinking about the impact that computing is having on society.
And actually, I just want to add this one. So this is exactly, so you talk about these English editors that they were actually doing the edits for the journal. Yeah. Now, actually, this is the one that I think, like if you go with ChatGPT, that's doing a very good job of editing the text. And unfortunately, they may lose the job because it has a very good knowledge about the whole things. And also it write it very smoothly. So that's like—
Write very smoothly. So next time I'm going to write or write one of my columns, I will do an experiment. I'll write a column, and I'll ask ChatGPT to polish the text. We'll see what it would do.
Actually, it works great. I have already tried.
Yeah.
You need to still work, in an interactive way, but you can actually get a very good result out of it.
Yeah, I don't know that I would like it for the following reason, because I have a style in writing. It's not a conscious style, but it just when I write and people say, "Oh, we recognize your style," you see one of your essays, we can recognize it even if we don't see your name on it. ChatGPT is a great smoother because it averages over all text in the world.
Yes.
So the result looks so polished because it's just incredibly smooth. It's averaging over everybody. I'm not sure that I want my writing to be so smooth. I want my personality to stay in the writing.
Yeah, but I think you can use some. You don't need to take the whole things. You can get suggestions from that. So in some sense, I think I was talking with Eric Demain actually 2 days ago. So this ChatGPT is essentially like this philosophical question: P versus NP. So like before, like if you want to say that, the question is that whether we can solve a hard problem, NP hard problem in polynomial time or not. That might be very hard. But now, in some sense, this ChatGPT solved for the writing this P versus NP. You don't need to be a very good writer. You can, essentially understand what is good writing versus bad writing. And then you can just play with ChatGPT, give some ideas and get some ideas from it, and essentially make the text much better.
So I'm still experimenting. I did do an experiment. I gave him titles of some of my columns, and I said, write an essay about the following topic. And in each case, it wrote a very polished essay. You can tell him even how long it's going to be. You can say, please write an essay of 750 words on this. Every essay that he wrote was very, very polished and total BS.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's not a very good thing. And I think same thing even for writing programs. A small thing, if you can find on the web, it can give it. But in polishing, your text actually works perfect.
I will do an experiment in polishing, and I have to see it. I'll see if I like the polish. Okay.
Yeah. So we will talk about it. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
By the way, Sergazi from I think it was he's a PhD student. He said, "I hope that you like Kazakhstan when you move there." So these were some of the comments that I mentioned.
No, I had a great time in Kazakhstan. And remember that before going there, I did taught myself the Cyrillic alphabet.
Yeah, that's like the important.
So I got to Kazakhstan and I tried to read some of the note, and I can read some of the letter, but I couldn't read some of the other letters. So it turned out that the Kazakh alphabet is the Cyrillic alphabet plus. They've added, they needed some additional characters. So it is based on the Cyrillic alphabet, the Russian alphabet, but they have some special Kazakh letter, Kazakh symbols.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought it would be just be Cyrillic. Yeah.
Great. So I think going back to a CSCM. So this was, I think, I will say the summary of my understanding so far. That it was like this one. So at some point, there was some people essentially communication of HCM is CSCM. Some people from information systems essentially were very involved there. And at some point, it become like a clique. If you are publishing a lot there, then lots of people in your community are publishing there. Then you took, because of this experience that you had it essentially, or future of somehow jobs in CS, and this essentially a group that ACM formed, they somehow put being editor-in-chief of CACM on you, and then you had essentially took the over, and I think it went great. So there's a few questions. I think lots of these current articles the people are not submitting that much. I think there is a section for submitting, but lots of them are actually you are selecting it from other conferences or other journals.
So,
am I right?
So I'll tell you. So first of all, two things. One is that when I took over this and I met with the president of CSC or of ACM at the time, he told me we want CSCM to become again the premier publication. But he said it's also a top-rank IS publication. We don't want to give it up.
I see.
And I said, no, that these two things are inconsistent with each other. So I took on myself I said, IS will be represented just like any other field. It cannot be the main topic of CSCM. And I, at the beginning when I started, I received a lot of hate mail from the IS community. You're taking a top publication and you're destroying it.
Yes.
I was the destroyer of CSEM as an IS publication. And I said, yes, this is my mission. My mission is to make it a top computing publication. And IS can have a percentage of the content, but it cannot be dominant. So the key was to have first of all, to have breadth of topics. And my model was that no one is going to take CSEM and come Monday and read it cover to cover. But everyone should be able to open CSEM and says, at least one article is interesting to me, okay? So that was my goal. So for example, I also, at the time, I was against special issues. People wanted me to do special issues. I said, no. You do special issues on software-defined networking. Great. Will be of great interest to the people in SDN.
No.
But this is the premium publication, flagship publication of ACM. Everyone has to find, people don't say, oh, this week this month about SDN. I don't care about SDN. So I was against special issues at the time. And then the other thing that happened was that before even starting the process, I wrote an article about my vision for the new CSEM. It was published in CSEM. And I thought everybody will read my vision. And this is, oh, great, Vardi is taking over CSEM. He's going to make it the flagship publication again. No more all this IS stuff that we don't care about. Let's start submitting papers. So I sat there waiting for the papers to come. No one showed up. No one came. Habits are people are creatures of habit. So I realized, oh my God, I'm launching a new publication. I need content. Where do I get the content? So I basically started to go after people and says, you need to write a paper for CSEM. And people says, CSEM, no one reads CSEM. I don't want to publish my paper there. I said, it's if you publish your papers, people will read it. That's how we're going to start reading it. And I really twisted people's arm to write papers for CSEM. And out of this came actually an insight that's still relevant to this very day, is that especially if you want a flagship publication, you are in the curation business. You can't just sit there and wait for papers to come. Because if you wait for papers to come, one, it's as I said, this is a very unpredictable process, and you need to have monthly output. And you want to make sure that it is balanced across all areas of computer science. And so you have to identify unrepresented areas and go after them. You have to look at overrepresented areas to say, no more. We are going to decline paper even if they look good because we have already had too many papers in this area. So ACM is not a journal. Some people think it's a journal. It's not a journal. It's a magazine. Okay. And magazine, you know what magazine, where does it come from? It's come from an Arabic word. Maybe you're even using in Farsi, mahsan.
I see. Yeah, so I didn't know it.
What is?
I know some Arabic, but I didn't know that actually came from.
So mahsan, it's also a word in Hebrew. It just means a storage room. So in fact, have you been to France? What is a department store called in France? Magasin.
Yeah.
You know, if you go to a big department store in France, which department store sell everything, so they call it magasin. It's a my French accent. I don't know how good it is, but it's magasin. And so magazine means it contains everything. And so if you look at magazine, came from like Time magazine and Newsweek magazine. It's supposed to cover many. They will have a section on science and a section on sport and a section on culture, section on politics, section on US, different things. So CSM is a magazine. It's supposed to have everything. That require much more active proactive job for editors than it is in a journal. Most journals operate we do special issues, and that's kind of very often by invitation. But most of the, JCM, JCM is a top journal. People want to publish papers there. You just wait for this paper. You review them by quality, and that's it. That's how you publish it. You're not trying to manage the balance of topic or things like that because it's just too difficult.
Yes.
So CSM require very very proactive editing. It's just very different job as an editor. And that's why much of the content is still by curation. So I'm still a senior editor. So I'm not the editor-in-chief, I'm senior editor. I stepped down in 2017 as editor-in-chief. After 10 years, decided it was new time for new blood. But my main job now is to just keep my eyes open, see interesting things, see an interesting talk, read interesting news article about some work that was done somewhere. And then I go to this person and says, write a paper.
So is it currently monthly?
It's a monthly. It's still a monthly magazine.
And I think, look, that was an amazing thing that you were writing essentially column every month for
Not
that.
every month, every 2 months, every 2 months.
Every month. It's a lot of work essentially. As you mentioned, you need to find the content for putting in because every 2 months you get it. I think that's a great job actually. Doing someone is doing that.
Yeah, you have to. I said this is something I discovered at the beginning, so I did not want to. So at the beginning it was. It used to be, now it's less common, but it used to be the president would write also bi-monthly columns. So we would kind of alternate between the president and me. But I write once a month. It's just very, very difficult. But even every 2 months, it means that you constantly have to think about. I said it's about the discipline itself, about computing. It's about computing in society, just different topics. Sometimes it's about even more somewhat technical topic. They're like theory versus practice in computing, something I want to write about. So yes, you have to, and so it forces me to keep thinking, very often when in research, we just go very deep. And this forces you to think in a broad way where we are.
Yeah, and so I want to go to the other topics, but so currently CACM has lots of selected papers from other things, and still people can submit papers there, correct?
Yeah, you can submit papers. Well, and papers still by submission. Many of the paper, even the paper that are solicited, okay, so they have one section, research highlights,
yes,
that is really curated from computing research conferences. And the SIGs are invited to nominate papers.
Yeah.
So we ask the SIGs to curate the content, so, from programming languages, and their nomination is not necessarily, it goes to a committee. There is a section of the editorial board, the research highlights section, and they take the nomination from the SIG, and then they decide on which one they're going to accept. And again, they take papers that have to be very good papers in let's say, programming language, but they also want them to have some broad appeal beyond just a narrow appeal.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think that's a very good idea.
SIG plans are a very good job. So even if your paper is not accepted for CACM, you get brownie points. Your paper was nominated.
Exactly. So these are the things that people can put one line in their CV.
You can put in your CV. You can put in your CV. The same way
people, easy things. Yeah.
People talk about, he got nominations for the Academy Award. Even if you didn't win the award, nomination itself is an honor.
Yeah.
So,
but also
research highlight is very much by curation, by the SIGs and the editorial board.
Yeah.
But if you look at contributed articles, many of them are, I call them solicited. That is to say, for example, I would go to someone and say, please write a paper, and tell them, write a paper. It will still have to go through peer review. I would say among these papers that are solicited, 90% will be accepted. Because in some sense, I've already applied judgment on the topic and on the writer.
The writer.
Okay? So the acceptance rate is very high, but it's not 100%. Every time, it's uncomfortable when I invite someone to write a paper and then the paper ends up being declined. But it happens. And then I have to say, I'm sorry, But there was a phrase that goes back, I think, to Romans. They say it's a Latin phrase: "Dura lex, sed lex." Lex is law.
Yeah.
Dura is hard. Durable. Dura lex, sed lex. The law is hard, but it is the law.
Yeah.
So I said, peer review is hard.
Yeah.
But we have agreed to live by peer review.
Yeah.
So we are all harsh reviewers when we are the reviewers, and we always complain about harsh reviewers when we are the authors. But this is the life we chose to live.
Yeah, but yeah, I think now this actually, I think we had a paper like I think a few years ago from a start that got actually for this research highlight, and now it's a very good thing that your paper gets there.
No, it's a very good thing. You get lots of visibility. Every paper, people don't realize. Okay, so CSCM first of all goes in paper to about 100,000 people. Okay. And so the exposure level of paper in CSCM compared to a paper that goes to your favorite conference, it's just uncomparable. Okay. We have papers appeared in CSCM that had hundreds of thousands. I think we have one paper that was approaching, maybe already reached million downloads. Think about it. One paper.
Yeah,
I think there was a paper about Google keeps its code base they have one. It's a monolithic database. They have a monolithic database, not a distributed database, and they have technical reasons to do that. And they agreed to. I asked someone to write an article about it, and they agreed. They wrote an article. Not everything they would write articles about. For example, I asked Google to write an article about search quality years ago, and they said, we can do it. It's a trade secret. We can publish on it. Okay.
Yeah. No, you can ask them to write about BART.
But about the code base, they agreed to write an article. That article went viral. I mean, everybody wants to know how does Google does their code management, so to speak. It's not code, it's code management. Revision, all the whole story there. So that article got, I said, hundreds of thousands of downloads. It has, and there is it's very, very hard to reach such an impact.
Yeah.
By publishing in a conference. So CSCM give you, and that's why I try to encourage people, people who are watching this podcast, submit, if you have papers that you think are strong and they have interest with the broad community, submit to CSCM, because if it's accepted, it's the loudest megaphone you can have for a research paper.
Well, sometimes essentially the magazine of the ACM essentially, and the ACM is already a proud thing. So the magazine I think it's the magazine of the ACM.
It's a flagship publication, and again, the main thing is that it goes to 100,000 readers. Okay.
Great.
So you're reaching an audience which is broader than anything you can reach by going to a typical. Even you go to a big conference, you can go to NeuroIPS, which is a very large conference, but they have by now thousands of papers.
Yeah.
Here we have, every issue is about 110 pages. So they're not humongous.
Yeah.
So you have a chance of reaching more people than you. If you want to reach a broad audience, this is the best way to reach a broad audience.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting. You talk about download, because download is something that you can measure. The people, if you just send it to them, they may not read it. But if they say download is high, it means that they actually downloaded it.
Yeah. So I measured, especially I would say for my columns, citation is not necessarily a relevant thing for a column. Okay. I mean, some of my columns are cited, but academic citation is not the right measure for columns. I want to know how many people read it. So I look at downloads. Okay. Yeah. So I know that if I have more than 10,000 downloads, then that means 10,000 people try to read your article. Let's think about it. I mean, 10,000 people read your article. That's something, as we say, not to sneeze at.
Great. So I think we talk about ACM and your earlier life. Now let's go. In between, and also I want to connect it to your research. Talk about logic. So you went to college, and then you want to talk a little bit about your PhD. What was the topic? Was it essentially logic, and what is logic actually? Then we can go there, and then after that, how did you essentially end up at Rice, that you have been there for 30 years? and then we can talk a little bit more about the research stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
So when I was in college, I took a course on philosophical logic, and it was very boring. And eventually, I went to the teacher and I said, well, given my mathematical background, I'm taking this course, but it's kind of not very challenging to me. Is it okay with you if I'll do the assignments, I'll take the exam, but I won't come to the lectures? I had the chutzpah to go and say that. I didn't say your lectures are boring. I said the material is not very challenging to me. I'm learning, but it's not very challenging. So she said, well, it's your call. So I stopped going to class. I just did the homework and the exams, and I did well in the course. But I thought logic was very boring. It was mostly analyzing all the kind of different syllogisms. It was boring. But then when I was a master's student, I did my undergraduate degree at Bar-Ilan University in Israel. And then my master I did at Weizmann Institute. And there I took a course in mathematical logic. And the teacher was a gifted teacher who was able to combine rigor and insight. Okay, Yaakov Shweka. He was a student of Michael Rabin. And he was really a fantastic teacher. And I suddenly got a very different view of logic. But again, it was just an interesting course. I didn't see it at all as a research area. The way I got into research was I was a master's student, and one of the courses we had to take was a research seminar. And a research seminar was there were two instructors, and they would give you a paper to read, and you had to present the paper in the seminar. And my advisor was my advisor, he was not my advisor yet, but the person who one of the people who led that seminar was Katriel Be'eri, was the database theory researcher. So he gave me to read a paper in database theory. And I read the paper and I made a presentation. My father came to hear it and he was very impressed. Didn't understand a word, but was very impressed nevertheless. And at the end of the paper was a question, open question. And I said, this is an interesting question. And
which university was that?
Weizmann Institute.
No, not Hebrew, because you got your PhD at Hebrew, correct?
Yeah, I'll tell you how I go to the Hebrew. Yeah. So this was I started thinking about this question. I started talking to Be'eri about this question. And it became clear that this is a good enough topic to do a master thesis. But Be'eri was not a faculty member. He was adjunct at the Weizmann Institute. His main appointment was at Hebrew University. He was adjunct at Weizmann. He did some teaching there because the main reason was because at the time, academic pay was very low. In fact, a few years later, all academics in Israel went on a big strike because they were paid so low, they couldn't make a living. You couldn't make a living on an academic salary. So people had to do additional teaching. So he did teaching at the Weizmann Institute, and that's how I met him. So we started mapping out the research project, and I wrote what I had to do at Weizmann. I had to write a research proposal, which was like 5 pages research proposal. But he could not be my advisor at Weizmann because he didn't have a primary appointment there. So I went to some other professor that I knew because I took a course from him. And his area was numerical analysis. But he knew me as a good student. So I went to him and I said, I'm looking for a formal advisor. And I wrote a proposal. Would he be willing to read my proposal and see if he's willing to be my primary advisor? And he took the proposal from me and he says, oh, I had this bureaucracy. And he didn't even read the title. He just signed it. He said, if it's good enough for Katriel Be'eri, it's good enough for me. So he was my formal advisor. He did not read the proposal. He never read the master thesis. He said, if it's good enough for Katriel, it's good enough for me. So he signed my proposal, and a year later, he signed my master thesis. So I did my master there. It was on what was then known as database dependencies, which today the more general term is people call it integrity constraints. So you realize that the data has to satisfy some constraints. For example, if you have a table employee salary in a company, you expect the employee to have a unique salary. Maybe employee department, maybe you can be a member of different departments. But employee salary, no, so one employee, one salary. So this is called a functional dependency. There should be a function from employee number to their salary. And then people start, this was a research area that started in the 70s, really started even going back to Ted Code and used relational model. And he discovered these dependencies. And out of this came various normal forms, what's a good way to decompose the relationship, third normal form, Boyce code normal form. And so my master's thesis was about something called joint dependencies. And then I wanted to continue. I love the Weizmann Institute. It's a real ivory tower. It's a beautiful campus, and I was very happy there. So I went to Professor Rabinovich, who since passed away, who was my master's thesis formal advisor. And I said, would you be my formal advisor for the PhD? He said, no, I don't think. A master was it's one thing, it's 1 year. I don't feel it would be right for me. And you're already so when you go to Weizmann, you take a year of courses, then you find an advisor and you do a thesis. You're already a student here, so I wanted to help you. If you're going to a PhD, you should go to Hebrew University and work with Catriel. So I said, yeah, okay, makes sense. I went to Hebrew University. And Hebrew University was very, very strong in mathematical logic. I mean, there are some, Saharon Shelach, who is one of the foremost logicians in the world, is a professor at Hebrew University. And then starting to talking to logicians, I realized that these dependencies that we are thinking in terms of structural constraints on the database can be formulated in first order logic. And I took the course on logic, so I knew some logic. And so that's really kind of the connection. My PhD was about formulating this integrity constraint, these database dependencies in first order logic. And it turned out this corresponds to a particular class of first order formulas. It's not full first order logic, it's a particular class. And then there were questions about decidability. When is it decidable? When is it undecidable? And axiomatizability. So this end up what my PhD was really about using mathematical logic to study integrity constraints.
Good. So do you want to, just maybe give, like we know the logic, for example, you have and or not, and then, this we have first order logic and second order logic, monadic second order logic. I knew some of them because of my work on parameter algorithm. But yeah, do you want to give maybe a little bit, just maybe for the people who don't know that much about it, say, what is the logic, and then we can talk about its use.
So the logic it's not full first order. Of course, you can say, well, you have first order logic, use it. But then we know that pretty much everything is undecidable. So we were looking at dependencies that were known as, one is that was known as a database as functional dependencies. We talked about it.
Yeah, but can you just define logic maybe? How do you define logic?
Okay, so going back a little bit to logic. So logic, first of all, you go back to learn to understand logic, you have to go back more than 2000. You go back to the 4th century BC. And the Greeks love to argue. They had, we talk very much today, we talk about sophism. The sophists were master of the argument. Today we take sophistry as a negative word. Oh, it's an empty argument, okay? But the sophists was really masters of arguments. And then the question was, okay, how do I know that an argument is correct? What is a correct argument? And so logic was trying to formalize what is a compelling argument. And this came from philosophy. It was not part. Today we think of logical proof. They did not think about proofs. They also discovered proofs, like, when they discovered the proof of Pythagoras theorem, and a proof is like an airtight argument. Once you see a proof, just this is it, nothing to argue about. To them, it was amazing gift from the gods. It was amazing. And still, to me, I think of it, if you look at kind of major intellectual milestone for humanity, I think the discovery of the rigorous proof is just one of them, okay? Where we took, again, we can talk a lot more about history of mathematics. Mathematics starts with language. And then language involves abstraction. And then, you have 2 apples and 2 oranges. You can say no relationship, 2 apples, 2 oranges. You say, no. Two-ness, they have two-ness in common, okay? And so you form the concept 2 by abstracting over 2 people, 2 monkeys, 2 apples, 2 oranges. We said the 2 is a common thing. So 2 is now a mathematical object. And then we look at 2 and 3 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We say, each one of them have something in common. They are numbers. So we abstract again, and we talk about numbers. So mathematics was the study of, is still today, the study of abstractions. And then we discovered not just mathematics. For example, we know that the Babylonians discovered the phenomenon of Pythagorean triples, because we find tablets with cuneiforms that enumerates Pythagorean triples. But so some people say, the Babylonian knew about Pythagoras theorem. But that's a step too far to many historians of mathematics. It's not clear. We know that the Greeks had formal proof of Pythagoras theorem, which is very different than just a phenomenon of Pythagorean triples. So I think, to me, the discovery of proof is just amazing step for humanity.
I think I want to emphasize that it's not the problem of the past. This is indeed the current problem. Like, if again we go to ChatGPT, this is exactly the problem that it has essentially. And essentially there was some kind of Ramsey theorem that I mentioned. I give me a proof. It proved, and then it didn't prove, actually, just give some BS. And then I said, okay, prove something more, some extra that I know that it was not correct. And they still gave me a proof. And it was still a bullshit. So that's actually, this is the one issue that still we have it. And I think somehow this idea that proof is coming from the God really actually might be the case that this is something that is beyond our.
So when I teach a course, Logic and Computer Science. And when I start the course, I ask the students, the very first lecture, I ask the students, what is logic? And they come with all kind of answers. And I tell them they're all part of the truth, but not the whole truth. And my answer is, logic is the search for truth. Okay? Logic is the search for truth. And it's the observation, which is an amazing observation. So, you see truth. Right now, I'm sitting, you're sitting. So this is the truth. But there are other things that are more complicated than that, okay? And they will have, if you click on leave, on your screen, you see the red leave button that says leave. If you click on it, you click on it on your end, and I will lose the connection from you from my end. Now, this is a complex assertion. Is it true? So part of when we talk about truth, it's not just the fact, is it training or is it not training? Okay? They're more complicated. Okay? Even think of to say, this apple is mine. This is a complex assertion. What does mine mean? Okay? It's not, this is an apple. This is an apple, just a statement of fact. Okay? But this apple is mine. This is a much more complicated thing. What does it mean? Even the concept of property, mine, how does it become yours? So how do we, and why do we care about the truth? Because without the truth, if each one of us lives, and we see it now, part of what we're seeing now in our society is people call it the crisis of truth. That we have grown up to think that information is good. Information is knowledge. Information is good. So what's the conclusion of this? More information is better. And most information is best. Just maximize on information. What we are learning now is, it's more complicated than that. It's not a linear phenomenon. because we have limited bandwidth. So there is a phrase TMI. And we think of TMI, too much information. We think of TMI, people who reveal too much information about themselves. I don't want to hear about your skin disease, okay? Don't tell me about your skin disease or your digestive problems. I'm not interested. But we are all having to deal with a world that so much information at us. We can't process it all. So, and what we discover is that when we can process all information, we start to be selective. And we select the thing that we like to, there's some information that we like, some information we don't like. So we start to create bubbles. And this is, of course, amplified if someone there, if someone that does the content curation, we talked about the content curation I had to do for CSCM. Now, what happened if I, now imagine that, let's go to the world where CSCM, there's no print publication anymore. And in fact, everybody will open CSCM and they'll see CSCM that is tailored to them. We publish more articles. You open CSCM, we can do a print issue, but electronically, why do we have to have one issue of CSCM? Why don't we get everyone see their own issue? And then we should show you only thing you're interested in. But then we lose the thing that we do want to point out, the breadth of computer science, the wholeness of computer science, the interaction between different parts of computer science. These things, the connection, the dots you can draw between, the line you can draw between different things. All of this disappear if we tailor information, if we do too much curation. So the truth is very important to us. And logic was the source of truth. So at the beginning, it was about how do we know that argument is a correct argument? And this goes back to the first, from the 4th century BC until the 19th century CE. Logic is part of philosophy, and it's about correct argument. And then what happened in the 19th century, in the second half of the 19th century, we're entering a crisis in mathematics, the foundational crisis in mathematics. And it starts because we go back to the question, what is a proof? An airtight argument, right? Well, who agrees that this is airtight? What is airtight? So if you look at and for many years, what was airtight was geometry. Geometry had axiomatic proofs. It was airtight. Calculus and algebra were a bunch of recipes. If you thought at the beginning how you were taught in high school, how you were taught calculus. In fact,
more like engineering, you want to say, actually.
I would say even when I learned calculus, it was in the United States, we distinguish between what we call calculus and analysis.
Yeah.
Analysis is calculus with rigor. Now you start talking about epsilon and delta. But when we learned calculus in high school, we didn't do epsilon and delta. We says, well, what happened when the thing, when you're looking at the ratio, you look at the function, and you look at the ratio of delta y to delta x.
Yeah.
What happens when x becomes very, very small? And it was very soft argument, okay? And they gave you recipes, this is how you do derivatives, and you learn the recipes. And what people discovered in the 19th century, that we are living too much to intuitions. And, we're looking at, for example, if we have an infinite sum of continuous functions, is it continuous? And people say, yeah, continuous functions, the sum, yeah, it should be continuous. And the answer is not necessarily. Mm-hmm. And people start to find proofs that were published, and people say, we're not sure about it. And then Cantor starts thinking about infinite, and he proves that there are sets of uncountable size. And it was mind-blowing. In fact, he proved that there are uncountably many different infinities. This is mind-blowing. And now you go back to calculus and you look at all the proofs, they're all about the infinite, infinitely large, infinitely small. So this concept of infinite has been controversial all the way back to Aristotle. Even now, philosopher of mathematics, I still saw I'm on a mailing list foundation of mathematics. And there are people who argue that, instead of thinking of infinity as a concept, you say infinity is a mathematical entity. There are people who say, no. There is something called the potential infinite. They don't want to say there are infinitely many numbers, but you can keep counting more on and on and on. So you have potential infinite, but it's not a real infinite. So Aristotle said there's no actual infinity. But other people say, yes, for humans, there's no infinity. But gods can see all the natural numbers. So God sees infinity. So infinity is there. Maybe it's hard for us to grasp, but surely God doesn't say, I just have to keep counting. God can see all the numbers. So there are infinities. So this was almost theological debates. And so these debates about the infinity go for 2,000 years. People still continue to debate the infinity. Among mathematicians, you find 19th century mathematicians that says, no, the infinite is not a legitimate mathematical object. And then Cantor proved there are infinitely many distinct infinities, because you can keep doing, you do diagonalization to prove uncountability, you can keep doing it, you take the power set or the power sets. So Cantor publishes proof, and important mathematicians said this is not a proof. This is theology. This is not mathematics. And Cantor ended up depressed, and he ended up dying in insane asylum because he couldn't cope with the rejection of his work.
Oh, yeah.
And then we discovered that the solid foundation of mathematics are problematic. And then people then Frege said, okay, we need to have solid foundation of mathematics. What should be the solid foundation? It should be logic. Because logic is about the truth. And there should be no doubt about it. Everything should be completely rigorous about it. So he said, well, first of all, we have to talk about the language of mathematics. What is the language of mathematics? So he published a small book in the 1870s called A Language for Concepts, where Boolean logic already existed before that. So first of all, if in some sense, even the foundation, if you look at the syllogism, they had the concept of and or, and not. They had the quantifiers implicitly, but not explicitly. But Frege says we can put it all together. And first order logic is the language of mathematics. Why is that? He said every mathematical, any mathematical discourse is about some mathematical domain. And mathematical domain have objects. And we have predicates, which are properties of objects, single objects or relationship between objects. Two lines intersecting, it's a relationship. And so we have functions. So you put objects and functions and predicates, and then you take the Boolean connectives, and then you add the quantifiers that were kind of invented independently by a few people around the same time. They already show up in the syllogism. All humans are mortal. All Greeks are human. So they're implicitly already there. So let's formalize them. Let's give them a symbol, inverted A and inverted E are the symbol to represent the quantifiers. So we have a language for mathematics. So this is the way it was introduced, a language for mathematics. And that's the way it was then for several decades. And I think the point of transformation, so first of all, there were two things. One is that the quest for foundation of mathematics, to have solid foundation for foundation of mathematics, led to what became known as Hilbert's program, which was try to fully formalize mathematics. And the question was, okay, mathematics is based on rigorous proofs. What is a rigorous proof? How do you define rigor? We have an intuition what is rigor. What is rigor? But ultimately, the answer to what is a rigorous proof is, a rigorous proof is a proof that a machine can check. It requires no creativity. Machine should be able to check proof. Proof have to be machine checkable. What kind of machine? A washing machine? So we had to formalize this concept that was existing before, mechanical computation. So what is a concept before that? If you look at much of what we do in algebra, high school algebra, solving linear equations, solving quadratic equations, you got a recipe and you just follow the recipe. And so in some sense, in that sense, it was mechanical. You don't need creativity to solve linear equations, a system of linear equations.
Yes.
You just follow the recipe, you follow the instruction. You need no creativity. You have a quadratic equation, you just plug it, you have a formula, you plug it into the formula. You need no creativity there. So there's a concept of mechanical computation. But again, it was an intuitive concept. So so people says, well, a proof has to be able to check mechanically. But what does it mean mechanically? We have an intuition, we can, it was the old quote about the Supreme Court. One of the justices said, I cannot define pornography, but I know it when I see it. So we couldn't define rigor, but we know it when we see it. But now it's not enough. We want to formalize what is rigorous proof. So we have to formalize, we said machine checkable. We have to form machine checkable. And so now in the 1930s, people are trying to define machine checkable. And they come up with different formulation, recursive functions, lambda calculus, Turing machines. Turn out they're all equivalent. And so out of these came up, okay, and Turing machine, what Turing did as opposed to recursive function and lambda calculus, he didn't just come up, here's a definition. His paper is a beautiful example of what I call mathematical modeling. He said, let's take a mathematician that computes, and let's build a model for a mathematician that computes. The mathematician will use a sheet of paper. The sheet of paper is broken into there is a grid. Well, it's not important. It's a square grid. I can actually do it I can take all the rows and tape them together. It will be a tape.
Exactly.
And the mathematician doesn't carry too many facts in its head, finitely many facts. So the Turing machine will have finitely many state, but an infinite tape. And every step of computation is local. Well, that's how we got Turing machines.
So in some sense, I think I want to say a good summary that logic is the one that actually makes somehow defines the mathematics, rigor in mathematics, and connect it well with computer science.
So the first connection. So if you look at logic, what is logic as intellectual discipline? So there is philosophical logic that I'll put aside for now. There are still people who do analytical philosophy, and they do logic, but there is mathematical logic. People you find, many of them are in math departments, and mathematical logic, people are dividing it into proof theory and set theory, which is about foundations, and model theory, and computability theory. So this computability is still something that logicians study. But clearly, at that point when Turing invented Turing machines, and we have the 1930s, Turing machines and the recursive function, lambda calculus, this is in sense the beginning of logic in computer science. So this is one connection that has to do with computability, a different formulation from computability. And the Turing machine in particular, as opposed to lambda calculus and the recursive function, Turing machine enable us to have very, very easy definitions of runtime, how many steps the Turing machine makes, and how many cells you use on a tape. And this idea that you can quantify the resource consumption of a computation on a Turing machine, this is the beginning of complexity theory. Complexity theory it's all about resource consumption, and we need to measure it precisely. And if I can benchmark thing on a computer, but that changes from one year to the next, and which computer I'm going to use, x86 or a Mac, or which one, or ARM. And so the fact that you had now, so now you have a mathematical model, and we says, well, actually, if we do it for this model, it tells you a lot about all the other models. So because this is the most fundamental model. So complexity theory comes straight out of this computability theory. You can think of it as an applied branch of computability theory. Mostly today, this is done by computer scientists and not by logicians, complexity theory. But the problem of P versus NP is accepted as a major open problem in mathematics. Now, it's beyond just computer science. I mean, there was the so-called the Clay Institute announced some years ago awards for opening major open problem in mathematics. They were called Millennium. It was around 2000. They're called Millennium Problems. And P versus NP was one of them.
Yeah, I think it's 1 million they are giving, but now due to inflation, I think they should increase the price.
I don't know if they increase it or not. I haven't looked into it. So this is one connection that came between logic and computer science is via the computability side. Okay. Then connection came in other areas as well. So then the next connection between logic and computer science, it first starts with Alan Turing himself. So in 1949, Turing asked, how do we know that when we wrote code, it does what we wanted it to do? This is what we call today the problem of program verification. Okay. And how do we know that you wrote code? And we all know that writing programs is much harder than it seems. And we think we have a clear idea in our head, and then we write the code and we find bugs. I mean, one of the, to me, the great lesson we can talk about it, how I got into programming, and it teaches you intellectual humility. But again, you said, well, there's something must be wrong with the computer. They said, no, the computer has been tested by then you say, oh, the compiler, there must be a compiler bug. I wrote a program. How come it's not doing properly?
Yeah, this is the one that like my son actually was writing early on, the writing program that he couldn't make it correct. A stupid computer cannot do the
stupid computer, stupid, and then you're a bit smarter, a stupid compiler.
Yeah.
But then you realize, no, I own the mistakes. The mistake are on me. And I think it's a great lesson also in humility. Okay. The computer is pretty much, we have to accept that it's infallible, and the compiler has been, yes, there are compiler bugs, but the chance that your program is not running because of a compiler bug is pretty much negligible. So we teach our students, if your program is not writing, it's your mistake. And I think that's an incredibly valuable lesson. So Turing asked, how do we ensure the programs do what they intended to do? Today we call it program meet their specification. They meet their designer intent. Okay. So how can we tell that this is going on? So he published a paper. The first paper publication is 1949. Okay. And then you have
Turing published that work.
Turing, short paper, like 4 pages, 3-4 pages paper, short paper. And then other people, Wirth, and then Floyd, and then 1969, 1969, we have the axiomatic basis for computing programming. Tony Hoare writes a paper. And he basically says, well, we want truth. How do we have truth in mathematics? We have proofs. So we have to have proofs. So he proposed a logic, what we call today Hoare logic. He proposed a logic for proving correctness of programs. And this is still very much an active research area. And then logic kept showing up in other places. So the next place where, for example, logic shows up was in databases.
Yeah, exactly. Database consistency essentially.
So, no, even before that, the whole concept of relational database comes from Ted Code, who was, it's an interesting story. We don't know exactly where he was exposed, but he was in Michigan, and he was exposed to logic there. And he suddenly gets the idea that if you want a universal data structure, so one of the things that happened in mathematical logic, when Frege defined his logic, there was no clear distinction between syntax and semantics. But one of the most prominent logicians of the 20th century was Alfred Tarski. And he said, we need to distinguish between the syntax, which is the language, the same way that we understand there is a difference between, I talked to my students, I said, look, there is a difference between the syntax of a sentence and its meaning, right? They say, yeah, there is syntax and there is meaning. I said, well, actually, where does meaning happen? Meaning happens in our brain. And where does syntax eventually happens? In our brain. So, but we still find it very useful to distinguish between the two things. There's the syntax and there is the meaning. And Tarski proposed the same thing for mathematical logic, which was not a clear distinction before. And he said, mathematical logic is a language for mathematical domains. What is a mathematical structure? It's a mathematical structure has a domain, the set of elements, the set of objects in the universe, sometimes called the universe, and its relations and predicates. So let's separate them from the language. And Ted Code says, wow, if you can describe every mathematical domain as universe and relations and predicates and functions, or predicates are relations, why can't we describe arbitrary data structure like that? So you go to University of Maryland and they have a database of the employees and the students and the relationship between them, which courses, which students a student take and who's advisor and all of this. He said, okay, it's not the classical mathematical structure, but nevertheless, the same format that we describe to describe mathematical structure can also describe this data, and he come up with the idea of the relational model.
Yeah. Actually, I was teaching this at the Principles of Data Science course. That was actually quite interesting. That these are very nice things that we can actually present it
and then the second thing was that he realized that if we want declarative queries, logic is a fantastic language for declarative queries, because it describes, you want to know, okay, you can write a formula that says, okay, give me the list of all the people who are in the same department as Vardi, and you can describe it declaratively. Before that, when you look at early databases, we have the hierarchical model, the network model, and people wrote imperative programs to do query. A query was a program. Every time you wrote a query, you wrote a program in imperative language. You had to chase pointers, you have to follow the pointers. So that was how people wrote it. And he came up with a wonderful idea that you can write queries declaratively by using first order logic. And, he formulated it a little different. He called it the relational calculus, but it's essentially first order logic. Then he also said, well, how are we going to implement it efficiently? So he introduced relational algebra and showed that you can compile relational calculus relational algebra. And this kind of observation, on one hand, that you can use relation as tables, and then you can use first order logic for query, and you can compile them into executable queries. You go from declarative to executable. This was his contribution. There was a huge fight over this. You're maybe familiar with the concept, the relational wars. Huge fight over this, even inside IBM in the mid-70s. But ultimately, the world has moved to relational databases.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think this is exactly so in some sense we can say the whole SQL actually is the logic that we have it there. It's part of the logic.
SQL was part. SQL came out of, there were really two projects, one at Berkeley by Stonebraker and one at IBM, to say, okay, first order logic is for mathematicians. They believed at IBM, the philosophy was we need query language that secretaries can use. That's how they called them at the time. Okay, today the model, secretary was a person who keeps your secret.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure why it fell into disrepute, and we think that assistant is better than secretary. Somehow it happened. But the idea was we will write a query language that secretaries can use. Well, it turns out it's not so simple. Even SQL is used, but you need SQL programmers today to write SQL queries. But still, it's much, much easier than writing imperative programs. So that's another place that logic came into computer science via databases. We talked about complexity theory came from computability theory. And then we talked about kind of a more proof theory, and that gave us whole logic as a more proof theory. And in some sense, databases came from model theory.
And I think the other area that also you worked on that, and actually all of these areas that your contribution that you got the Kurosawa part, also the multi-agent system. I think probably even game theory.
The other part, I'll get to that, but the other part was, first of all, even before that, was in AI. In AI, people start thinking about, okay, what is intelligent behavior? And they thought was, to be intelligent, you have to be logical. It can be crazy. I mean, if you're, there are people who are not logical, but we think this is crazy. We don't think this is intelligent behavior. We think of this as aberration. People who are not, if you believe P and you believe that P implies Q, you should believe in Q. And you don't believe in Q, then you're crazy, and this is not intelligent. So if you look at the beginning of where AI was very much about symbolic logic. And in fact, there was a huge success of this in the late 70s and early 80s. People realized the whole idea of rule-based systems were expert systems. People discovered very often expert reason by following certain rules. People have gone and they had to try to formalize how does an expert make a decision, and in turn, the expert has certain rules. And then if they can formalize it, and the example was medical diagnosis system, the early ones were in the 70s, and they give you take these symptoms and you take this thing and you follow the rules and you get into a diagnosis. And so they had actually very good diagnostic system already in the 70s, expert systems. And then there's a whole Japanese fifth generation Japan was going to take over computing. Using these, they're going to be specialized hardware for this. It was the big thing. So logic keeps popping up in different places. Okay, so I would say symbolic AI. Then symbolic AI fell into some of disrepute. But now you hear a lot about neurosymbolic. Now the whole thing is neurosymbolic reasoning. People saying yes, neural AI is very important. We've made huge progress. But we shouldn't give up on symbolic reasoning. Now is the question, how do we integrate them? And then another place that in my own career that logic came into play was by looking at multi-agent systems. And it came originally was from distributed systems. I had colleagues who work on distributed system looking at questions like Byzantine agreement, and clock synchronization and things like that. And there was a beautiful observation that came out from my colleagues, collaborators, Halperin and Moses, that synchronization and agreement in a distributed system corresponds to common knowledge. So that concept existed before. So common knowledge was when we have a group, and common knowledge is the limit when you say everybody knows something. And everybody knows something. Exactly. And everybody knows that everybody knows something. You take it to the limit, and this is common knowledge. So, for example, in the diamond trade, very often people would shake hands on the transaction. They would verbally agree on it, and then they would shake hands. And what is important of handshaking? If two people shake hands, they have common knowledge that they shook hands. Okay. If I send you a message, I never know that you received the message. If you send me an acknowledgement, you never know that I received the acknowledgement. Yeah. So we can keep sending acknowledgement. I received your acknowledgement. I received your acknowledgement, my acknowledgement. I received your acknowledgement, blah, 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 blah. But shaking hands, we are synchronizing physically. So we know we have common knowledge. And that observation turned out to be was made in a context, it's important to economics, partly what happened in economic systems. So that led to the whole other kind of research area, which is the epistemic analysis of multi-agent system. We call it the distributed system, but ultimately it's become the epistemic analysis of multi-agent systems, which is actually coming back again. It's very interesting because we know that humans have so-called theory of mind. That is to say, I mean, they do experiment on children. You take maybe someone who is a child who is a 2-year-old, and you have two opaque jars. And you put a cookie in jar 1. And there is a toddler and the mother is there. And then the mother leaves. And you tell the toddler, I'm going to move the cookie to the other jar. And you move the cookie. And then the mother comes back. And you ask the toddler, okay, you want your mother to give you the cookie. Which jar you're asking your mother for a cookie. Which jar is she going to open?
Yeah.
And at early age, the toddler thinks, well, I want the cookie is in this jar, is in jar 2. So the mother will open jar 2 because I asked her for a cookie. A bit later, I don't remember exactly, maybe age 4, the toddler will think, the mother did not see that we moved the cookie. So the mother will open jar 1 because she still thinks the cookie is in jar 1. At that point, the children have theory of mind. Okay, so to reason about, we live in a society and we reason about people, and we have to reason about their mental state. So if you think about it, it's kind of amazing. Each one of us is a black box in some sense, but to operate in a society, to be able to interact with each other, we need to understand what happened inside the black box. And this thing just come up now. Now there is a debate now whether ChatGPT has theory of mind. And some people say, yes, I don't know exactly. I'm not an expert. We'll have to see. But there are some experiments that say, yes, he was able to supposedly reason about other people's state of mind. But other people, he made the same mistake like the young toddler.
Yeah.
And did not realize, well, other person did not see the change. So they think the cook is still in jar 1.
Yeah, I think, I don't think that at this point it has the theory of mind.
I'm skeptical. But the point is that theory of mind is very important to people. And it turns out it's also very important not just to people. It's important to a distributed system. You distribute the algorithm. You send a message. You want to know, was the message received? So how would you know the message was received? You get an acknowledgement. So it was shown that reasoning, think about multi-agent system along the epistemic dimension is a very important part of understanding how systems behave. Going back, for example, to game theory, there is an observation that becomes, in fact, very important to our political system right now, okay? And this goes back to something that the philosopher Wittgenstein was considered one of the important philosophers of the 20th century. And he said or wrote, every game has an unwritten rule. What is the unwritten rule? Follow the rules of the game. And you can't write it down, because if you write it down, you need the new rule that say, follow that rule. So in every game, we need two things. So the standard thing in game theory is to say, the rules of the game, for example, even the games in exactly normal form, okay? The payoff matrix is common knowledge.
Yes.
Otherwise, we talk about Nash equilibrium. Nash equilibrium is all about reasoning. If I do this and you do this, what will happen? If I don't know all the payoffs, then I can't do this kind of reasoning.
Yes.
So usually there is an assumption there in game theory that the structure of the game and all the payoff, what they call the rules of the game, they're common knowledge. Otherwise, you cannot really do much of the analysis that we do. Okay.
Yeah, some of the things I was teaching this introduction to computational game theory to undergrad. And you see, these are the common knowledge. We are just talking, this is the common knowledge. But now you think about it, actually, that's the limit. That's the thing that's happening. It's quite a complicated concept, actually, the common knowledge. And
common knowledge is complicated. Common knowledge is complicated. What we are discovering now is that it's not enough to have common knowledge. We have to have some kind of a binding agreement that we will follow the rules of the game. Okay, think what happens in the 2020 election. There are rules of the game, and for democracy to work, everybody has to follow the rules. So people think that what holds the country together is a constitution. No, what holds the country together is we agree to follow the constitution.
Exactly.
So think what happened, for example, see the distinction between the election of 2000 and the election of 2020. People now forget how controversial was the election of 2000 because of the voting in Florida.
Yes.
And the problem there was, do you remember the phrase, people now all voting is electronic, people forget the concept of hanging charts, the little piece of paper that are punched out. What happens if they're not fully punched out, they're still hanging, does this vote count or not? Hanging charts, now people don't even know what it means to have a hanging chart. And the reality was that the vote in Florida was very, very close. So every time they count, they get somewhat different answer because the difference was a few hundred votes, and you're counting millions of votes. So there's no way you get it. It's even you think about it, it's a difference of I think they had like 6 million votes. So difference of 600 is going to be 1% of 1%, and it's very difficult when you vote mechanically and manually to be more precise than that. So eventually, the Supreme Court said, in a very controversial decision, controversial on legal grounds, I've read legal analysis that says it was a very controversial decision. The Supreme Court said, stop the count in Florida. And Al Gore said, okay, this is the end. The Supreme Court has ruled. We stop the count in Florida. Bush won Florida. Bush won the election. He's the president. He was vice president. He went to certify that he lost the election. Nobody says, oh, look at this. Al Gore is a hero to certify the election. He said, the law said I have to certify the election. I'm going to certify the election. It was, nobody gave him big medal for not continuing to contest the election.
Yeah.
So there is a part about games that we now understand. You have to agree to follow the rules of the game. But again, there is the epistemic dimension. It's not enough that, even to think about when I go to a red light, to intersection, I have green light. Okay. I drive through the green light. I don't even slow down. I just drive through the green light. Why is that? Because I believe that the traffic lights work properly. That means that I have green light, then the other side, the intersecting side, will have red light. And I further believe that the people who will come and see red light will stop. I believe that people will follow the game, follow the rules of the game. So epistemic analysis is something we do all the time without even thinking. I said, why are you driving? Aren't you afraid? I said, no, I have a green light. Well, what does it mean? Yeah. And you think, they have red light. They will stop. Okay? I guarantee you. Well, we all know it doesn't always happen. Okay? There are cases, the light can be broken, which I've never seen. The two intersections will have red light, green light. I've never seen it happen. There are people who run a red light. We've seen that happen. Accidents do happen. But this was another case. So the point of logic, really, if you go back and say, why is logic showing up in all kinds of different parts of computer science? Because it was the language of mathematics. And the important thing about the language of mathematics is that it has to be rigorous. Human language is just notoriously ambiguous, we know that if I just change the inflection on a sentence, I give the example to my students. I only borrowed your car. I only borrowed your car. I only borrowed your car. Just changing the inflection changes the meaning of the sentence. Okay? You say it means something different. And the point of logic, it was the language of mathematics. And the goal of mathematics, we want to have rigor. We want to have something with machine checkable. So once you have logic, you have the precision, and the machine checkability as the foundation. It's part of what not the logic that goes back to the Greeks, but at least its logic has developed all the way from Aristotle to 19th century to Frege and then Hilbert. It's a language that gives you rigor and machine checkability.
Yeah. So I think that's actually great.
And even the distinction between syntax and semantics, which was some philosopher of mathematics debate. In computer science, we all understand the syntax of the programming language is different than the semantic, which means how it will execute on the machine. So this distinction, it means that when you build a compiler, you first do just parsing, and you don't care at all about the semantics, and you do lexical analysis, and you don't care at all. Where do you care about semantics? Only when you go to translate, you've done all the parsing, all the preparation. Now you have to translate it to machine code or intermediate code. That's where I say, okay, that's where the semantics comes in. So this distinction that was a major contribution in mathematical logic distinction, for us, it's obvious. Of course, we have to distinguish syntax from semantics.
Yeah, so that's a great, actually. I think like to summarize these things. So in some sense, actually, it was very, I mean, very nice. I mean, discussion that they had, and I really, I mean, this I learned a lot myself from this because before I had about this, I mean, logic. I worked on some of this, but now I think the one that you mentioned actually connects all of them very nicely together. That when we talk about artificial intelligence, that intelligence part is actually the logic part. Or I mean, like if we talk about all this type of things, these are common. I mean, we talk about common knowledge, we talk about voting, I don't know, about anything. All of them come somehow. We need some kind of rigor essentially here, and this rigor comes in some kind of mathematical rigor, which is indeed actually the logic. And
actually, even neural, people forget how neural nets came about. Neural nets came from a paper in 1943, okay, 80 years ago. And the paper tried to understand how does the brain operate. And before that, in fact, when you go, this and trying to understand the brain, when you go to Boole, when Boole introduced, write his book in the middle of the 19th century, 1849. What was the book about? It was about the fundamental laws of the mind. When you read about it, he thought, well, that's the way how the mind, and then he thought of the mind as a logical faculty. That's the way the mind works. He was trying to, this was really a book in cognitive science, okay? Then Pitts and McCullough, when introduced neural nets, they're still trying to understand the brain, but they said we need a richer logic. And a richer logic would have, and in fact, you know, there is a concept even in when people do circuit complexity, the concept of threshold gates. Even before, you know, people have studied threshold gates. So a threshold gates could be instead of, for example, if you think about it, what is a disjunction? It's a gate, it's an OR gate, it's a threshold gate. One of the two inputs has to be one. So this threshold is one. What is an AND gate? The threshold is two. The two inputs must be true. And now you say, well, if we want a richer logic, and one of the things that you go richer, but to say, well, this limiting us to just 0 and 1 is just too limiting. Okay. And in fact, this is already, people have proposed it like fuzzy logic to say, if you want to deal with the real, you know, yes, lots of domain we can deal with just 0 and 1 by compiling everything to bits. But does it make sense to do analog reasoning? In fact, I just received email yesterday from someone who claimed that they have an analog algorithm for 3 SAT that is in polynomial time.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm not holding my breath, but people have asked, you know, I mean, in fact, there's a whole area, I think it's less active now, but used to be active, multi-valued logic design. So right now, when we build hardware, the voltage is either high or low. And in some sense, why don't we have voltages in the middle? And can we be more efficient? Now we are wasting a lot of the possibilities. So people have to try to design multi-valued logic design for practical reasons. At the end, we decided that the Boolean logic, this binary logic, is the easiest to work with. But people have considered the possibility that you'll have intermediate values. So in fact, if you go back to the ENIAC was base 10, was not yet binary. The arithmetics of the ENIAC was base 10, because that's how people do arithmetic. So let's build it into the hardware to do base 10. Later on, people realized just go binary. It's the simplest way to design things, to binary. So it was a pragmatic argument. So our people says, when we reason about the world, we try to reason sometimes about analog quantities. So should we not try to work at analog level? So there are now, you find people talk about real valued logics, and people looked at how to make logic more, not just Boolean, but richer than that. So in some sense, Pitts and McCullough are saying, if we allow, let's have, even if the neurons are just firing, not firing, we can have a richer gate if the neurons are connected to the connected, you have input neurons and they come with weights. They argue that the connection, the dendrites can carry some weights. And so we have now now we have different type of threshold gates. But again, this was really, if you go to Pitts and McCullough, it was a paper in logic. They just try to understand a richer concept of logic than the classical Boolean logic.
Yeah, actually, you mentioned that's actually interesting, that email that you mentioned about like SAT. So you may think about, I mean, if they have some, it's not like the logic that you have, or like these devices that you have are not 0, 1, and they can take any like infinite number of things. Maybe that infinite things actually can help to solve SAT. I mean, it's not a trivial thing that you cannot do that. And as you mentioned, the infinity by itself is a non-trivial concept as well. And some non-trivial things happen when you consider infinite series or sets or some other things. So that's actually quite interesting.
Look, there's another debate towards, for example, you have been taught about real numbers. Now we can argue the real numbers exist because real numbers are an abstraction. Okay? Real numbers are an abstraction. And okay, we know that we have irrational numbers. But again, if you look at the irrational numbers, there are only countably many of them, okay? Because they are, I'm saying irrational you get by taking roots, for example. Well, if you still do that, there are only countably many numbers. Okay, roots, I mean, you still take roots of numbers, and you take ratios of roots and polynomial of this. This is all countable. How do we get to uncountably many real numbers? By saying a real number is let's say, a number with possibly after the period, the decimal period, infinitely many numbers. That's an abstraction. Do such numbers exist? So going to the continuum was a beautiful abstraction, able us to simplify tremendously much of mathematics. But, you know, you have people like Stephen Wolfram. You know, the universe is discrete. There are no real numbers in the universe. In computing, do we have real numbers in computing? Not really. We're floating point numbers. We don't have real numbers.
We don't have, yeah. Yeah, that's actually quite interesting. I mean, you will think about it like, if there is no logic, you cannot believe in anything. Because that can be actually, you can argue about it, and there are some non-trivial examples that people can create there. So I think great. So do you want to, I mean, maybe mention, I think we talk about it, you mentioned actually all this area very nicely. Do you want to see, I mean, some of this major contribution also that, I mean, you had it, I mean, and you like them a lot essentially, and maybe some open problems, major open problems in those areas. That would be great if you can.
So, you know, there are, I think the kind of the thing that I mentioned before is that if you look at AI, we went in waves. The first wave was symbolic AI, okay? And that kind of, you can describe it as John McCarthy was the promoted symbolic AI. And then there was a second wave of AI that says, no, to understand the world, we also need to reason probabilistically. Probability is an important part in us reasoning about the world. And causality is another part of us reasoning about the world, causality and probability. And that leads to another Turing Award in AI, which is Judea-Perel. And then we had the third wave, which was neural reasoning. And there was a Turing Award for deep learning. There was just given a few Bengio, Hinton, and LeCun received the Turing Award for deep learning. And in my view is the challenge for each one of them, I think, is an important paradigm. It's an important way, you know, to me, intelligence is going to be, it's like the proverbial elephant, you know. It's something that's shaped in our head by millions of years of evolution. And we have an illusion, it's one thing. But we know now the brain has different parts, and people have done even experiment. What happened, you know, the two chambers in the brain are connected by something called corpus callosum. What happened if you disconnect the corpus callosum? So there was a movie of, you know, the man with two brains. What happened if your two chambers are not connected to each other? How does it affect your function in the world? There are experiments on that. So the brain is not one simple thing. And I think to think intelligence would be just LLM with more and more parameters. To me, these are all simplistic things. Just intelligence is just too complicated. It will be a simplistic answer. And I think to me, the great challenge today is how to integrate these different paradigms. How can we make them work together? And some people call it neurosymbolic reasoning. My own work right now is focused on Boolean reasoning, but make it quantitative.
What do you mean by quantitative?
For example, you're given a Boolean formula. So classical satisfiability asks, does it have a solution? I ask, how many solutions does it have? Okay, that turned out to be a more difficult problem.
Yeah, counting in some sense.
Counting, these are counting problems. This is sharp sat.
Yeah.
Count it. It's difficult. Okay, how about we approximate it? What does it mean to approximate it? How do I approximate it? So there's a whole bunch of research. Now, part of my own research is what I would call quantitative Boolean reasoning. And maybe it's not even just counting solution, but maybe different solutions, different weight. There's some weighting scheme. And I want to take the sum of all the weights of the satisfying assignments. So again, we make it more and more quantitative. And by you making logic more quantitative, you make it much closer to probabilistic reasoning. And so I'm to me, the great challenge now, what I call the great integration. Instead of arguing about the different paradigms in AI, how to make them work well together. If you take, for example, the concept of paradigm shift was introduced by Thomas Kuhn in 1960, I think, the paper on the structure of scientific revolution. And a poster child for this was we had the Ptolemaic model of the planetary motions, which made good predictions, was actually fairly accurate. But at the end, we dismissed it for a simpler model of the heliocentric model, the Copernican model. And we threw away the previous model. And then we refined the Copernican model by the Kepler's model, which is instead of circles, ellipses. And this is the model we use today in terms of gravity. So the paradigm shift story kind of tell you throw out the old paradigm because you have a whole new paradigm. But we had classical mechanics, and then we brought relativity theory and special relativity and general relativity. Did we throw out classical mechanics? Absolutely not.
We are still using it, yeah.
When you build a bridge, use classical mechanics. When you go to the moon, classical mechanics. I suspect that even going to Mars still uses classical mechanics. Okay. On the other hand, it turns out that when you need to do GPS, require on very precision of clocks, then we do need to take into account relativistic effects.
Yeah.
So the answer is that special relativity and general relativity refine classical mechanics. They don't throw it away. I mean, there are very few cases where we throw something completely away. Yes, sometimes we have theory that we say, no, they don't make any sense today. But many cases we keep up the old theory because they work very well. We view it as an approximation, but we don't say.
I think the best way. So you may have a curve essentially. You may give it fine tune, but sometimes you are just essentially with some kind of linear function try to approximate it. And for a local view, actually, it's a very good approximation. You don't need to have that complexity of the whole thing essentially to understand.
So there is a tendency now. Deep learning has been so successful. We don't need anything else. I think it's just to me too simplistic. There are many other things. I mean, the answer is that we do follow classical logic in many areas of life. We do follow rules, and how to integrate all of this to us instead of being, I think, religious about it. No, my research is better. Your research area is how to integrate these different things. So because intelligence, I think, it feels seamless, but it's really just because of evolution. There are really different modules of the brain. In fact, there was even called, I think, somebody described the brain as the society of minds. Even the brain is not monolithic. There are really different entities inside the brain, and they have to learn to work together to give us this. We have a feeling of the unity of intelligence, but it may be an illusion itself. So I think this is one great challenge, how to integrate the different paradigms of AI. going back to another topic that we discussed, and it was complexity theory. So I think many people would agree that probably complex theory is one of the most beautiful areas of theoretical computer science. The theory is just incredibly elegant. So I just love the theory for its elegance. But the progress in such solving put a question mark. We just, for years, when I was a student, NP complete means end of the world, nothing you can do. It's hard problem, it's intractable, nothing you can do. And now we can solve problems, we can solve SAT for industrial problems with millions of variables. So the goal of complexity theory was to explain to us what is hard and what is easy. But now, this NP complete, it does not give a good explanation. It's not fine enough, okay? We know that you can create synthetic problems with a few hundred variables, nobody can solve them. But industrial problems very often are easier, and we can solve problems with millions of variables. We need an explanation for that.
Yeah, I think that's actually the great thing that I talk with lots of people. I remember actually I was talking with late David Johnson, who was my boss at AT&T. And this, I think 2010, even he's giving such a thing that, we had some instance like set cover. We know that there is nothing better than log n approximation for that. There's type things, even the things. But like in practice, we had something from AT&T. These are real world data, 400 instances. In all 400 of them, except one, just the greedy algorithm that should not work, give the optimum solution for us. And even in that one, if you change some tie breaking, you could get the optimum. And it was anyhow off only by one. So, and we don't have any justification that why these kind of real world examples are somehow easy, and what is the definition of easy and hard essentially.
So I think if the goal of complexity theory is not to prove just beautiful theorems, but to give us practical guidance on what is hard and what is easy. So, in 1970, the NP completeness was a beautiful observation that explained why some problems are just not, that we don't have anything better than exhaustive search, okay, to solve them, guaranteed solution. Mm-hmm. But now we solve many of these problems in practice, they're not hard. So we need a better theory, a richer theory that will explain to us. And so far, people have tried to come up with all kinds of structural measures that would explain why SAT is not so hard in practice, but there's no fully satisfying answer yet.
Yeah. I mean, so you consider the deep nets, for example, all these things that we are doing, gradient descent and all these things. I mean, we believe that we know these are functions, we know that there are local minimum or local maximum and global minimum maximum, and we believe that they might be far from away. But in some sense, in practice, at least for all this kind of reasoning, it seems that if you do the local one, it's already a good thing, maybe even the maximum. And we don't understand why is it the case, actually.
No, we don't understand why deep neural nets are so effective. We don't understand why they're so effective. They're very effective. Everybody recognizes it now. Why are they so effective? Why are they so good at approximating very, very good, very huge, incredibly good approximation of such function by this kind of training? Not just, people have shown that I think that there could be universal approximators, but we're not, we are using a particular training regime to train them. And we still don't understand fully why they're working so well. Okay. And we look at the other kind of problem domain, which is, program verification. So we've made huge progress, and people don't always know, but we are now able to verify industrial size programs, really quite non-trivial programs. We kind of understand today that there is an important thing that it's not a theoretical, it's a real life insight rather than a theoretical insight. Verification costs money. How much verification do you want to do? How much money do you want to invest in what kind of guarantee do you need? How much money are you willing to invest? So it turns out that today the biggest group in formal verification in the world is sitting at AWS, Amazon Web Services.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing.
And why is that? Because the cloud changed the economics of verification. Because now, if people can find a way to breach the separation between virtual machines on the cloud, then it means that if you're running financial transactions, if you're an investment bank, and somebody is able to somehow eavesdrop on your applications and find out what trades you're making, then this is something you cannot live with. So suddenly it becomes much more important to invest a lot of money in formal verification.
So in some sense, actually, the question would be like, this is actually, because I've worked on such kind of thing for advertisement at Amazon, that how much even, like, you think that sometimes you get money from advertisement, but you should be careful, because if you spend more money, to see which one is appropriate even to bid for that, in this compute cost of that is more than the money that you will get it from advertisement.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not a good business anymore. So the same thing here. So verification, I think, getting some trade-off that, like, how much you want to be verified and how much money you want to spend it, and you can get some kind of trade-off or something between them. I think that would be a very nice thing. That's actually
and part of the challenge for us. You just heard the news about the Tesla full driving, the software. Tesla has been recalled because of the full autonomous driving mode, and there was even I don't know if you saw the Super Bowl ad showing Tesla car hitting a toddler.
Yeah, I didn't see that. I heard about it. Yeah.
Go just to Google and write Super Bowl ad Tesla. You'll see it's a pretty horrifying advertisement. Yeah. But part of the problem today, if you take like AVs, the control is it's not just big software. This big software contain blobs that have been developed by neural nets that train some neural controller. How do we verify that? So if we have today software, that more and more we will see software where parts of the software are controllers, various controller or classifier or whatever, they have been developed by just like as a DNN trained. How do we reason about the whole complex together? How do we know that if someone, let's suppose we have a neural net that classify cancer. We want to put some estimate on how good is this prediction. Can I say this is correct with probability 99%? What does it mean? So I think now we take program. In fact, our expectation of programs have risen. Well, we used to just want them to be correct. Now we want them to be also fair and transparent and explainable. So our expectation have risen. And that makes this whole area of program verification more challenging. It's not as if we solve the problem, because the problem keeps changing as software. The role of software in my life has changed, and the type of software we're dealing with has changed. Our expectation of software has changed, and therefore program verification gets new meaning. It's not anymore just functional correctness, which it used to be. Now we want the software to be well behaved. We call it trustworthy, and that is a broad word. And how can computer science rise to the challenge and produce trustworthy software?
And what about in the area
just to tell you, I'm watching the clock. I need to finish in 5 minutes.
Great. So I think so that is like a good thing. So I think we already covered actually lots of this. Things that we want to discuss. I think one quick question somebody asked me. If you want, you can answer. Otherwise, so that based on the thing that you mentioned. So, do you believe in God or not? That was the question. So, if you want to answer, you can. If not, I think you can.
I'm a devout atheist.
Okay, good. So I think one other question actually that came. So like this is, you can just answer very shortly. So what was the biggest challenge in your life? If you want to share.
Challenges are I would say almost all the challenges. There are kind of challenges I can think of. A big challenge for many people can happen, a big challenge in their life is their own health.
On what?
Health.
Health, yeah.
Health, you have someone's going, you have seen people suddenly, some funny thing, and you go to the doctor and he says, oops, you have lung cancer. That's a big challenge. I'm luckily, I did not have it so far. Okay, so I'm very fortunate. I did not have so far I had some years ago, I had appendicitis. I had to have an appendectomy. But in the big scheme of things, it's a relatively very manageable medical condition. So other than that, I'm in good health. The others, but health is a major issue, and it's a major issue when it comes to people who are close to you. So I lost both of my parents. It was age and deteriorating health. And that's your parents are the people who brought you to life, and they are the anchor of your life for many years, and losing them, you kind of, it's a big loss. I mean, I call it, it's a void that you cannot fill up that void.
Yeah, I lost my father, and I know exactly what's the feeling.
Yeah.
It was shocking to me.
Dealing with my wife is not in good health right now. That's a major challenge.
I hope that she recovered.
So dealing, I would say is, and then I remember also more as a younger person, relationships where I had a difficult time navigating relationships, and I remember lots of heartbreaks over relationships.
Great. So I think maybe this is like a last question. So do you want to say, the people that you are thankful to them, and I think you mentioned your parents, of course, but if others you want to mention, and also you have any final messages for high schoolers, who want to do computer science, logic, math?
So the answer is that one can be grateful. Almost every person with whom you interacted, there's something, if you think about it, you'll find something to be grateful for. So John White was the ACM CEO that asked me to become editor-in-chief of CSCM. And after I started, he and I have had some major disagreements, very, very major disagreements. And then a few years ago, he retired, and there was some ACM meeting, and they did a retirement event. And I was invited to that, and I asked to say a few words. And I saw that when I started talking, I saw the expression on his face. He was nervous what I would say. But I said the following. I said, you live your life in circle. You're the circles. You're the center of the circle. Then you have your immediate family. That's the next circle. Then you have your friends and colleagues with whom you work with, and that's the second circle. And then there is the third circle are people with whom you have some interaction, but less influential in your life. I said, for me, John White was in the third circle. I had some interaction with him, but we are not close personal friends. But nevertheless, I said, he had major impact on my life by asking me to be the editor-in-chief of CSCM. And that was experience that broadened me and forced me to kind of develop a bigger view of computing and a bigger view of computing in the world. And for that, I'm eternally grateful to him. And you see here that before that, I could see that he was just very worried about am I going to criticize him for our major disagreements? And then he was big smile on his face. So, almost anyone you interact with, you can think that even with people with whom I have negative interaction, very often they force me to grow. I was forced to grow because of that interaction. Okay, I had major disagreement with the previous president of Rice, but it forced me to take a very public position in the university. That forced me to develop a much bigger view of higher education. I gave a talk in 2021 about just analyzing Rice University over the last 18 years. Very, very, very kind of brutally frank analysis. And I'm told that this is now circulating among university boards as a model, how to analyze a university, how to analyze the performance of university. And it partly came up because of my disagreement with him. So we're in major disagreement. But
good things happen.
But something good thing happened because of that. Yeah. And now I must finish.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks a lot for being a guest. I think it was a great thing. I learned a lot. Hopefully others will learn already, or they will watch it and they learn a lot. And this all will be available in all these platforms. And again, thanks. And
thank you. You've been a fantastic interviewer. Thank you very much for inviting me and for this conversation.
Yeah, it was great for me. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.